6:47 a.m. A kitchen in a small house outside Portland, Oregon. Margaret Whitfield, 68 years old, retired school librarian, stands at her counter, coffee pot gurgling, and reaches for the same mug she's used for 11 years. It has a chip on the handle she keeps meaning to fix. She sits down at the table, the way she has every morning since her husband passed. Newspaper open, coffee black. But this morning, for no reason she can name, she notices something. Her hands wrapped around the warm mug feel stiff, not painful, just slow, like they belong to someone older than her. She flexes her fingers twice, shrugs, and goes on with her day. She wouldn't think about that moment again for almost a year. I'm Dr. Everett Cole, and this is a story about a 14-second window every morning that quietly decides how many good years are still ahead of you. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what was happening in Margaret's hands that morning, and why doctors are increasingly convinced that what you do in the first 15 minutes after waking up may matter more for long-term survival than almost anything else you do all day. And if you've ever noticed something similar in your own mornings, a stiffness, a fog, a low hum of something's off that fades by 9 a.m., this story might be about you too. For months, Margaret chalked it up to the obvious explanation: age. She was 68. Stiff hands, slower mornings, a little brain fog before the coffee kicked in. This is just what getting older feels like, isn't it? Her own mother had said the same thing at that age. You'll creak a bit, everyone does. Her doctor, at her annual physical, ran the standard panel: cholesterol, blood pressure, glucose, and everything came back within normal range. No diagnosis, no explanation, just the quiet, dismissive shrug so many of us are handed in our 60s. That's just aging. For a while, Margaret believed it too. But then her daughter, a physical therapist, mentioned something almost in passing during a phone call. She asked Margaret one question: "Mom, when in the morning does the stiffness go away? Right when you wake up, or a while after you start moving?" Margaret paused. She realized she didn't actually know. She'd never paid attention to when the stiffness lifted, only that it eventually did. That question is where the story actually begins. The real mechanism. Here's where I step out of Margaret's kitchen for a moment, because to understand what was happening to her, you need to understand something about how your body treats the hours right after sleep. And it's genuinely one of the more underappreciated areas of aging research. Think of your body overnight, like a house where the caretaker goes home. While you sleep, a lot of your systems, circulation, joint fluid, core temperature, blood sugar regulation, slow down and idle. That's normal. It's supposed to happen. The problem is what happens in the transition back online. For a younger body, that transition is fast and mostly invisible. For an aging body, that transition can be sluggish, and clinical observation suggests this sluggish window is where several risk factors quietly stack on top of each other. The real mechanism. Here's where I step out of Margaret's kitchen for a moment, because to understand what was happening to her, you need to understand something about how your body treats the hours right after sleep, and it's genuinely one of the more underappreciated areas of aging research. Think of your body overnight like a house where the caretaker goes home. While you sleep, a lot of your systems, circulation, joint fluid, core temperature, blood sugar regulation, slow down and idle. That's normal. It's supposed to happen. The problem is what happens in the transition back online. For a younger body, that transition is fast and mostly invisible. For an aging body, that transition can be sluggish, and clinical observation suggests this sluggish window is where several risk factors quietly stack on top of each other. First, blood pressure. Blood pressure naturally spikes in the first hour after waking. It's called the morning surge, and it's well documented in cardiovascular research. While you sleep, your blood pressure dips to its lowest point of the entire 24-hour cycle, sometimes called nocturnal dipping. Then, as your brain starts preparing you to wake, often before you're even consciously aware of it, your nervous system flips from its resting parasympathetic state into its more alert sympathetic state. Blood vessels tighten, heart rate climbs, and blood pressure rises, sometimes fairly sharply, in the span of just a few minutes. In a healthy, well-regulated system, this rise is gentle and gradual, a soft on-ramp rather than a jolt. But in a system that's been sedentary for years, chronically dehydrated, carrying excess overnight stress hormones, or simply asked to go from horizontal and still to vertical and moving within seconds, sitting up, silencing an alarm, standing to grab a phone, that surge can be considerably sharper. This matters more than it sounds like it should. Epidemiological research has consistently shown that heart attacks, strokes, and other cardiac events cluster disproportionately in the first few hours after waking, a pattern researchers often refer to as the morning peak in cardiovascular events. It isn't that mornings are inherently dangerous, it's that an abrupt, unbuffered transition from sleep to full activity asks a system already mid-surge to handle even more, all at once, with no runway. A slower, gentler start gives that surge room to unfold the way it's supposed to, instead of stacking extra strain on top of it. Second, joint lubrication. Every one of your joints, knees, hips, fingers, shoulders, is cushioned by a thin layer of synovial fluid, a natural lubricant that lets cartilage glide smoothly instead of grinding. Movement is actually what keeps this fluid properly distributed and at the right consistency. It behaves the way honey does when you stir it versus when it sits untouched. Thinner and more responsive when it's in motion. Thicker and more sluggish when it isn't. Across 7 or 8 hours of overnight stillness, that fluid settles and thickens, and the cartilage surfaces themselves can lose a small amount of their normal cushioning, since cartilage relies partly on the gentle compression and release of movement to stay hydrated. The result, first thing in the morning, is joints that genuinely need a short, low-intensity re-lubrication period before they're asked to bear full weight or move through a full range of motion. A small amount of slow, deliberate movement, not stretching to the point of strain, just gentle circles and reaches, redistributes that fluid and restores a more normal glide within a matter of minutes. Skip that step and launch straight into standing, walking briskly, or climbing stairs. And the joints are essentially being asked to perform before they've been prepped, which is why stiffness can drag on for 30-45 minutes, sometimes longer, instead of resolving in 5. Over years, this repeated pattern of underprepared joints doing full load work is one of the quieter contributors to accumulated wear, reduced comfortable range of motion, and, because stiff, uncomfortable joints make people move less throughout the rest of the day, a slow decline in overall daily activity levels, which itself is one of the strongest predictors of healthy longevity. Third, and this is the one most people never hear about, cortisol. Cortisol is often unfairly reduced to just the stress hormone, but that's an incomplete picture. In a healthy circadian rhythm, cortisol follows a very specific, predictable curve. It's at its lowest point around midnight, begins rising in the last couple of hours of sleep, and then peaks sharply about 30 minutes after natural waking, a spike researchers call the cortisol awakening response. This isn't a malfunction. It's a deliberate, evolved mechanism that mobilizes glucose for energy, sharpens alertness, and essentially hands you the get up and go needed to function. In a well-regulated system, that peak is followed by a smooth, steady decline across the rest of the day. The trouble is that this awakening response is highly sensitive to your environment in the first several minutes of consciousness. And two things influence it more than almost anything else: light exposure and the presence or absence of immediate stress input. Natural light hitting the eyes shortly after waking helps anchor that cortisol peak to the correct, healthy shape and timing. Abrupt artificial input instead, a jarring alarm, immediately checking a phone full of notifications, news, or email before your feet have even touched the floor, can distort that curve, either blunting the natural peak or triggering a second, unnecessary spike layered on top of it. Do this morning after morning, year after year, and the curve that's supposed to be smooth and predictable becomes erratic and unpredictable instead. That matters far beyond just feeling off in the morning. A chronically erratic cortisol rhythm has been linked in research to poorer blood sugar regulation, increased abdominal fat storage, weakened immune response, disrupted sleep the following night, creating a feedback loop, and, over the long term, measurably higher cardiovascular risk. IT's a hormone doing exactly what it evolved to do, just being asked to do it under the wrong conditions, morning after morning, for years. Individually, none of these three things sounds dramatic. A little stiffness, a blood pressure surge that happens to everyone, a stress hormone doing its normal job. But here's the mechanism. These three systems talk to each other, and when all three are mismanaged at once, morning after morning, for years, that's not a bad morning. That's a slow, compounding tax on your cardiovascular system, your joints, and your metabolic health, paid every single day before 9 a.m. for decades. That's what was happening in Margaret's hands. Back to Margaret. After her daughter's question, Margaret started paying attention. She realized her stiffness wasn't lifting gradually through gentle movement. It was lifting the moment she got moving fast, because her mornings were rushed. Alarm, phone, coffee, and out the door to walk her neighbor's dog by 7:15. She was going from asleep to brisk walking in about 6 minutes flat, with almost no transition in between. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't unhealthy in any obvious way. She was simply skipping the transition, the 15 minutes her body actually needed to come fully back online before being asked to perform. The turning point. Margaret's daughter suggested something almost embarrassingly small. Before reaching for her phone or even sitting up, spend 2 minutes lying in bed doing slow ankle circles, wrist circles, and a gentle full-body stretch. Reaching arms overhead, then to the sides. Then, before coffee, 5 minutes of unhurried walking around the house or a short section of the yard, ideally near a window or outside, letting in natural light. Only after that, coffee. Margaret tried it, half skeptical, for 3 weeks. She didn't feel like a new woman. That's not how this works, and I want to be honest with you about that. But she noticed, in that unremarkable way real change usually shows up, that by the second week her hands weren't stiff by the time she sat down with her coffee. They'd already loosened during her walk. She noticed she felt steadier on her feet on the dog walk. Her daughter, checking in a month later, noted her resting blood pressure reading, which Margaret had started tracking at her pharmacy's free kiosk out of curiosity, had dropped from a borderline 142/88 to a more comfortable 128/82 over about 10 weeks. Nothing miraculous. Just a body given 15 honest minutes to transition properly instead of being launched straight from idle into full speed. To show you this isn't just about joint stiffness, I want to introduce you to someone else, a very different person, a very different version of the same underlying pattern. Harold Ansah, 71, a retired civil engineer, living just outside Manchester. Harold wasn't stiff in the mornings. Harold's problem was different. For years, he woke up in what he called a gray fog. Not sad exactly, not anxious exactly, just flat, motivationless. It would lift by late morning, and he assumed it was simply what retirement felt like, the absence of purpose that used to be provided by a job. Harold's version of the wrong theory was psychological. He assumed it was about meaning, not physiology. And to be fair, that instinct wasn't foolish. Retirement absolutely can affect mood. But when a physician mentioned that his mornings, instant alarm, dim-curtained room, coffee in bed on his phone reading the news, no daylight for the first 90 minutes of consciousness, were essentially starving his cortisol and circadian rhythm of the two things it needs most to fire correctly. Natural light and early movement, Harold tried an adjustment. He began opening his curtains the moment he woke, before doing anything else, and taking a 10-minute walk outside, rain or shine, before his first coffee. Within a few weeks, the gray fog was shortening. Within 2 months, it had mostly stopped showing up at all. 2 very different bodies. 2 very different symptoms. One physical, one closer to mood and mental clarity. One shared mechanism. An aging body that needs a gentler, more deliberate on-ramp from sleep to full function than a younger body does, and pays a long-term price when it doesn't get one. So here is what Margaret's morning, and Harold's, actually taught, laid out as the framework their mornings quietly became, not as a rigid checklist. Minute 0, 2, before you even sit up. Gentle joint movement while still lying down. Ankle circles, 10 each direction. Wrist circles, 10 each direction. 1 slow full-body stretch, arms overhead. This is about redistributing joint fluid before you ask your joints to bear weight. Minute 2.5, sit up slowly, feet on the floor, and drink a full glass of water before anything else. You lose fluid overnight through breathing and sweat, and mild overnight dehydration makes both blood pressure regulation and joint stiffness noticeably worse. Minute 5, 15, 10 to 15 minutes of unhurried movement. Walking is enough. Ideally with exposure to natural daylight, even through a window, but outside is better. This is the window that trains your cortisol rhythm and lets your morning blood pressure surge happen gradually instead of as a spike. After minute 15, now coffee, now phone, now the news, not before. That's the whole framework. No supplements required to start. No equipment. The research behind morning light exposure and circadian rhythm and the research behind post-sleep joint mobility are both well-established areas of study, This isn't a fringe idea. It's simply a sequence most of us were never taught. When the story would have gone differently. I want to be honest with you here, because this video isn't about pretending gentle mornings fix everything. If Margaret's stiffness had come with swelling, redness, or pain that didn't improve with movement, that's not an aging morning routine problem. That's a signal to see a doctor, potentially about inflammatory joint conditions. If Harold's morning flatness had come with persistent low mood throughout the entire day, not just mornings, that's not a light exposure problem. That's a conversation worth having with a physician about mental health. Full stop. This video is general information, not medical advice specific to you. Please talk to your doctor before making changes, especially if you have existing heart, blood pressure, or joint conditions. Margaret still uses the same chipped mug. Some mornings she forgets the stretches, and that's fine. Nobody does this perfectly, and perfection was never the point. But most mornings now, she opens her curtains first. She does her 2 minutes of ankle circles before her feet touch the floor. She walks the block before she walks the dog. And when she finally sits down with that first cup of coffee, her hands are already warm, already loose, already hers. If your mornings have ever felt like Margaret's, stiff, foggy, rushed straight from asleep to go, I'd genuinely like to know. Tell me in the comments what your mornings actually look like right now, and I'll read them. I'm Dr. Everett Cole. I'll see you in the next one.